The clinking of silver against porcelain was the only sound Clara allowed herself to focus on. At a table in the corner of Aurelia, a restaurant so exclusive its name was only whispered, the low hum of polite conversation felt like a physical pressure against her ears. Across from her, Ethan dabbed his lips with a linen napkin, his signet ring catching the soft glow of the chandelier. He was handsome, devastatingly so, and he knew it. It was a weapon he wielded with casual cruelty. "Are you even listening to me, Clara?" he asked, his voice a low murmur that still managed to cut through the ambient noise. She looked up from her untouched plate of seared scallops. "Yes, Ethan. Of course. You were talking about the Henderson deal." He sighed, a theatrical sound of immense boredom. "The Henderson deal closed last week. I was talking about the new marina project. Honestly, it's like talking to a decorative vase. Pretty to look at, but entirely empty." The familiar sting of his words pricked her eyes. She blinked rapidly, staring at the intricate watermark on the tablecloth. For 10 years, she had been his vase, the perfect silent accessory for the brilliant self-made magnate, Ethan Croft. Except he wasn't self-made, not really. His entire empire, his sharp suits, this very meal, was built on the foundation of the inheritance her parents had left her. An inheritance he had masterfully absorbed into his own portfolio, leaving her with a generous allowance and a hollowed-out sense of self. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the apology a reflex she couldn't control. "I'm just a little tired today." "Tired?" He laughed, a short, sharp bark that made a nearby couple glance over. "What could you possibly be tired from? Your day consists of choosing which charity luncheon to attend and instructing the housekeeper on which flowers to buy. My God, the sheer exhaustion of it all." A single tear escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek. She quickly tried to wipe it away, but it was too late. He had seen it, his eyes, the color of cold steel, narrowed not with concern, but with a hunter's focus. "Oh, here we go," he said, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. He raised his voice just enough to be noticed. "The waterworks, right on cue, can't handle a simple conversation without dissolving into a puddle." Clara's face burned with humiliation. She could feel the eyes of the other diners on them. The waitress, a young woman named Sarah with kind eyes, froze mid-step on her way to another table, a look of pity flashing across her face before she quickly looked away. "Please, Ethan," Clara begged in a whisper. "Not here. Not here. Why not? Let everyone see. Let them see the delicate flower I'm married to. The woman who has everything a person could ever dream of and still finds a reason to cry over nothing." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial yet carrying tone. "Do you know what this is?" he asked the air around them. "This is what happens when you give someone everything. They forget how to be grateful. They become weak." He punctuated the word weak with a dismissive flick of his hand. And then, as another tear fell from her eye and splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth, he did the one thing that would forever shatter the fragile remains of their life together. He laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle, it was a full, throaty laugh, filled with genuine amusement and contempt. He laughed at her pain, at her public shame, at the utter brokenness he had so carefully crafted in her. The sound echoed in the suddenly silent restaurant. Clara felt something inside her snap. It was a quiet, clean break, like a frozen branch in winter. All the years of biting her tongue, of swallowing his insults, of making herself smaller and smaller to fit into the box he'd built for her, it all fell away. From a nearby table, a woman had been watching the entire exchange. She was impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit, her auburn hair pulled back in a severe but elegant chignon. Her face was a mask of cold fury. She had been dining with an older gentleman, but her attention was now solely fixed on Ethan Croft's laughing face. Her name was Amelia Thorne, and she was not just an heiress, she was the sole owner and CEO of Thorne Industries, the largest technology conglomerate on the continent, the very company whose stock formed the bedrock of the fortune Ethan so arrogantly flaunted. As Ethan's laughter finally subsided, leaving him with a smug, triumphant smirk, Amelia Thorne stood up. She moved with a silent, predatory grace. She walked not to Clara, but directly behind Ethan's chair. He didn't notice her until her shadow fell over him. He turned, an annoyed expression on his face, ready to dismiss whoever had dared to interrupt his performance. "Can I help you?" he asked, dripping with condescension. Amelia Thorne did not answer with words. Her hand shot out, gripping the ornate top of his heavy carved wood chair. With a strength that seemed impossible for her slender frame, she yanked it backwards. The chair toppled with a deafening crash. Ethan, caught completely off guard, sprawled onto the plush carpet with a cry of shock and outrage. The entire restaurant gasped. Silverware fell to the floor. Amelia Thorne looked down at the sputtering, furious man on the ground. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was as cold and clear as ice. "Get up," she said, not as a request, but as a command. But she wasn't finished. She turned her gaze to the stunned waitress, Sarah. "The bill for this table, and for Mrs. Croft's inconvenience, put it on the Thorne Industries corporate account." Then her eyes met Clara's across the table. For the first time, Clara saw not pity, but a blazing, resolute fire. Amelia pulled a sleek, impossibly thin tablet and a stylus from her briefcase, which her associate had quickly brought to her. She tapped the screen a few times, her movements precise and economical. She brought up a document, a complex series of directives and legal authorizations. Her eyes never left Clara's as she placed the stylus on the signature line. "What you just witnessed," Amelia said, her voice resonating with absolute authority through the silent room, was a man laughing at his own execution. She signed the screen with a flourish. The signature glowed for a moment before being accepted. It was an order that set in motion a chain of events so catastrophic, so complete, that by the time the sun rose again, Ethan Croft would be left with nothing but the suit on his back and the lingering echo of his own foolish laughter. She had just signed the order to strip his entire fortune. Clara stumbled out of the restaurant, her legs trembling so violently she had to brace herself against the cold brick of the building. The cool night air was a shock to her heated skin. The sounds from inside Aurelia were a muffled blur. The chaos she had left behind felt like a scene from someone else's life. Her mind was a whirlwind of Ethan's laughter, the crash of the chair, and the impossible glacial calm of the woman in the dark suit. Amelia Thorne. The name was legendary. Thorne Industries was everywhere, in their phones, their cars, the very infrastructure of the city. Why would a woman like that intervene? And what did she mean? An order to strip his entire fortune. It had to be a figure of speech, a dramatic, empty threat meant to frighten Ethan. It couldn't be real. A black town car, so sleek it seemed to absorb the city lights, pulled up silently to the curb beside her. The back door opened. Amelia Thorne was sitting inside, the tablet resting on her lap. "Get in, Clara," she said. Her voice was softer now, but still held an undeniable core of steel. Clara hesitated. Every instinct, honed by a decade of obedience and fear, screamed at her to run home, to lock the door and prepare for Ethan's inevitable volcanic rage. But the woman in the car had done what Clara had only dreamed of. She had silenced him. Slowly, as if in a trance, Clara walked to the car and slid into the plush leather seat. The door closed with a soft, solid thud, sealing them in a cocoon of silence. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding smoothly into the stream of night traffic. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Clara stared out the window at the blurred lights of the city, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could feel Amelia's gaze on her, patient and assessing. "My name is Amelia Thorne," the woman said finally. "I know this must be overwhelming." Clara could only manage a nod, her throat tight with unshed tears. "What I said in there," Amelia continued, "was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. The process has already begun. By morning, your husband's corporate accounts will be frozen. His credit lines will be revoked. His access to all company assets will be terminated. By the end of the week, his personal assets, which are leveraged against his corporate holdings, will be seized. The cars, the houses, the penthouse, everything." Clara turned from the window, her eyes wide with disbelief. "How? Why?" "I don't understand. His company. Croft Developments. It's his. He built it." Amelia offered a small, sad smile. "No, he didn't. You did. Or rather, your father did." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My father was a university professor, an engineer. He passed away 15 years ago. He had nothing to do with Ethan. He had everything to do with me, Amelia said, her voice taking on a new, personal tone, and by extension with Ethan. Clara, did your father, Robert Vance, ever talk about his work? Specifically, his work in the late 1990s on integrated data compression algorithms. Clara frowned, searching her memory. He was always working on something. He called them his blueprints for the future. He was brilliant, but impractical. He trusted people too much. His partner, his best friend from college. My father always said they were going to change the world together. Then the man vanished, took all of my father's research with him. It broke my father's heart. He never really recovered. He gave up on inventing after that. Amelia's expression was grim. Clara, what was your father's partner's name? A name unspoken for years rose from the depths of her memory. Thorne, Clara whispered, the realization dawning like a cold, horrifying sunrise. His name was Alistair Thorne. My grandfather, Amelia confirmed, her voice heavy with the weight of generations. He didn't vanish, Clara. He took your father's work, secured the patents under his own name, and founded Thorne Industries. The algorithm your father designed is the single most valuable piece of intellectual property our company owns. It is the bedrock of our entire global network. Everything we are, everything we have, was built on a theft. It was built on your father's genius. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. The stories her father told, the late nights in his study, the bitterness that had clouded his later years, it all clicked into place. He hadn't been a failed dreamer, he had been robbed. I only found out 6 months ago, Amelia explained, her gaze intense. I was reviewing the company's foundational patents for a legacy audit. I found discrepancies, notes in the margins, calculations that didn't match my grandfather's known academic work. I hired a private investigation firm. They unearthed your father's original research papers from his university archives. Letters between him and my grandfather. It was all there. Undeniable proof. But what does this have to do with Ethan? Clara asked, her voice trembling. When you married Ethan, you were the sole heir to your father's estate. That estate, legally, included the intellectual property my grandfather stole. The shares you inherited, the ones that formed the seed capital for Ethan's business, were a pittance paid to your father's estate by my grandfather as a consulting fee to quiet his conscience. Ethan took that money, leveraged it, and invested heavily in one company above all others, Thorne Industries. He knew a good thing when he saw it. Over 90% of his net worth is tied up in Thorne stock or in assets secured by that stock. Amelia leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Clara's. The order I signed tonight initiates a corporate action to reclaim all profits and assets derived from the stolen intellectual property and return them to the rightful heir. That heir, Clara, is you. We are not taking Ethan's fortune. We are returning your father's legacy. The car came to a stop in front of a discreet, elegant hotel. The doorman rushed to open the door, but Amelia held up a hand. I have a suite for you here, she said gently. You don't have to go back to him tonight. You don't have to go back to him ever again. My personal security is downstairs. You will be perfectly safe. Clara looked at her hands, which were shaking in her lap. She thought of Ethan, sprawled on the restaurant floor, his face a mask of fury. She thought of his laughter, cruel and dismissive. Then she thought of her father, a kind, brilliant man who died believing he was a failure. A new feeling began to smolder in the pit of her stomach, burning away the fear and the despair. It was anger, a pure, righteous anger she hadn't felt in a decade. He called me weak, Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. He has no idea what strength is, Amelia replied, but he's about to find out. Clara took a deep breath, the first truly deep breath she had taken in years. She looked at Amelia Thorne, this stranger who had just upended her entire existence, and saw not a corporate titan, but an instrument of long overdue justice. Okay, Clara said, her voice clear and steady for the first time that night. What do we do next? The first inkling Ethan had that this was more than just a public embarrassment came at 7 a.m. the next morning. He had stormed home the night before, the silent, cavernous penthouse feeling more like a tomb. Clara was gone. Her clothes were still in the closet, her car in the garage, but she was not there. He had seethed, rehearsing the litany of punishments he would inflict, the ways he would make her pay for the humiliation. He assumed she had run to a friend, a temporary pathetic act of defiance. His morning routine was sacred. A shower, then coffee, while his personal assistant, David, gave him the daily market briefing over the phone. He dialed David's number. It went straight to voicemail. Strange. David always answered. He tried again. Voicemail. Annoyed, he called his office main line. A junior secretary he didn't recognize answered. "I need to speak to David," Ethan snapped, forgoing any greeting. "I'm sorry, Mr. Croft," the young woman stammered. "David isn't available. Can I help you?" "Then put me through to my broker at Sterling Lynch." "I'm sorry, sir. We've been instructed that all communications for you are to be routed through the legal department of Thorn Industries." Ethan froze, the coffee cup halfway to his lips. "What? That's absurd. Put me through to Marcus Thorn in acquisitions." Marcus was his main contact at Thorn, a distant cousin of Amelia's who had always been pliable. "Mr. Thorn is no longer with the company, sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "There's been a significant restructuring overnight." A cold dread began to seep into his bones. He hung up the phone and strode to his laptop, pulling up his primary investment portfolio. He entered his credentials. Access denied. Account frozen pending corporate audit. Reference, TI-77B Vance. Vance, Clara's maiden name. It couldn't be a coincidence. He tried to log into his corporate bank account. The same message, his personal credit line, blocked. He felt a surge of panic, a sensation so foreign it almost made him nauseous. This was a mistake, a glitch. A power play by that arrogant Thorn woman to scare him. He got dressed in his most expensive suit, a hand-stitched Xenia that screamed power. He would go down to the Thorn Tower himself and sort this out. He would threaten lawsuits, he would call the press, he would tear down Amelia Thorn's carefully constructed reputation. He took the private elevator down to the garage. His 3 cars, a Ferrari, a Bentley, and a custom Range Rover, sat gleaming under the lights. He pointed his key fob at the Bentley. Nothing. He tried the Ferrari. Nothing. A yellow parking boot was clamped onto the wheel of each vehicle, a large sticker slapped on the driver's side window. Property of Thorn Industries, pending asset liquidation. The panic was now a raging inferno. He stumbled out of the garage and onto the street, hailing a taxi like a common citizen. The indignity was galling. As the cab pulled away, he saw 2 men in dark suits standing by the garage entrance, watching him. They weren't threatening, they were just observing. Like biologists studying a specimen in its final death throes. Meanwhile, in a sunlit suite at the Four Seasons, Clara was meeting Amelia's legal team. At the head of the table was Julian Vance, no relation, a man with a mind as sharp as the crease in his trousers. He walked Clara through the documents, his voice calm and methodical. "The initial asset freeze is complete," Julian explained, pointing to a flowchart on a large screen. This was possible due to a key person clause in the corporate bylaws of Thorn Industries, which Miss Thorn herself drafted last year. It allows for the immediate suspension of assets for any individual or entity whose holdings are found to be directly linked to fraudulent or misappropriated intellectual property. It's an anti-piracy measure designed for external threats. No one ever dreamed we'd be using it internally. He clicked to the next slide. It was a complex web of shell corporations, holding companies, and offshore accounts, all originating from Clara's initial inheritance and branching out into Ethan's vast empire. "Your husband was clever," Julian admitted. "He created a labyrinth to make his wealth seem self-made. But every path, every single dollar, leads back to the original seed money and the Thorn Industries stock it was used to purchase. He built a skyscraper on a foundation of sand, and we've just washed the sand away." Clara felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. For years, Ethan had belittled her intelligence, especially regarding finances. He'd told her it was too complex for her pretty little head. Now, seeing it laid out, she understood. It wasn't complex, it was just deliberately convoluted. A magic trick designed to hide the source of his power. "So he has nothing?" Clara asked, her voice quiet. "At present, he has access to a single personal checking account with a balance of $7,412, Julian said, checking a tablet. Funds that we were unable to trace back to the primary source. Everything else, the stocks, the properties, the art collection, the company itself, is in legal limbo, under the control of Thorn Industries, pending the final transfer to the rightful heir of Robert Vance's estate. To me, Clara whispered. Amelia, who had been sitting silently at the end of the table, spoke up. This isn't just about money, Clara. It's about restoring your father's name. We've already filed the motion to have the patents posthumously amended. The history books will be rewritten. Robert Vance will be recognized as the pioneer he was. We are also preparing a press release that will tell the whole story. The theft, the cover-up, and the restoration of his legacy to his only daughter. The thought of her father finally getting the credit he deserved filled Clara with a profound, aching warmth. The money was abstract, a number too large to comprehend. But this was real. A knock on the door interrupted them. One of Amelia's security guards entered and spoke in a low voice. Amelia nodded. Ethan is in the lobby of Thorn Tower, she told the room. He's demanding to see me. He's causing quite a scene. Julian Vance looked at Clara. The next step is up to you, Mrs. Croft. We can continue to handle this through legal channels, or you can face him. The old Clara would have shrunk from the very thought. The idea of confronting a raging Ethan was the stuff of her nightmares. But as she sat there, surrounded by people who were fighting for her father, she felt the last vestiges of fear fall away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She had spent a decade in his shadow. It was time for him to stand in hers. I'll see him, Clara said, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. But not here, and not in his world. We'll do it in mine. The lobby of Thorn Tower was a cathedral of glass and steel, designed to inspire awe and insignificance in equal measure. Ethan Croft, however, was not awed. He was incandescent with rage. He had been stonewalled at the front desk, treated like a common vagrant by security, and was now reduced to shouting at a beleaguered-looking vice president of communications who had been sent down to handle him. You can't do this, Ethan yelled, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. I own more stock in this company than half the board. I'll sue you into oblivion. I'll call every reporter in this city. Mr. Croft, if you'll just calm down, the VP pleaded, we can arrange a meeting with our legal counsel. I don't want your lawyers. I want Amelia Thorn. Just then his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Midtown Legal Services, 45th and Madison, Room 3B. 1 hour, come alone. It was followed by a single initial, C. Clara. A wave of relief washed over his fury. She had come to her senses. This was her pathetic attempt at a power play, egged on by that Thorn woman. She wanted to negotiate. He would go there, let her have her little moment of drama, and then he would put her firmly back in her place. He would be magnanimous, of course. He would forgive her once she had begged sufficiently. He left the Thorn Tower, a smug smile returning to his face. The cab ride to Midtown was a chance to collect himself. He would start by being firm but understanding. He would remind her of the life he had given her. Then, if she was still resistant, he would remind her of how easily he could take it all away. He still didn't grasp that it was already gone. His arrogance was a shield that reality had not yet managed to pierce. The address led him to a nondescript office building, a far cry from the opulent towers he was used to. Midtown Legal Services had a small, functional reception area. The sign on the wall read, Pro Bono and Low-Income Legal Aid. The sheer insult of it made him see red. She was meeting him here, in a charity law office. He was shown into a small, windowless conference room, and there she was. Clara. She was not crying. She was not wringing her hands. She was seated at the head of a cheap laminate table, wearing a simple but elegant dress he had never seen before. Beside her sat Julian Vance, and on the other side Amelia Thorn. Ethan's confidence wavered for a fraction of a second. This was not the frightened, pliable woman he had expected. Clara, what is the meaning of this? He demanded, gesturing around the shabby room. This little stunt is over. You've had your fun. Now come home. Clara didn't flinch. She looked at him with eyes that were as clear and calm as a frozen lake. This isn't a stunt, Ethan. It's a legal proceeding. Please, sit down. He remained standing, crossing his arms. I'm not sitting down. I'm not doing anything until you tell me you've called off this ridiculous charade. Did Amelia put you up to this? Is she threatening you? No one is threatening me, Clara said, her voice even. For the first time in 10 years, I feel completely safe. The words hit him like a physical blow. Julian Vance slid a single sheet of paper across the table towards Ethan's empty chair. Mr. Croft, Julian said, his tone professional and detached. This is a settlement offer, though offer is perhaps too generous a term. It is a statement of terms. It cedes all assets, corporate and personal, currently under the Thorn Industries audit, to our client, Clara Vance Croft. It includes a full dissolution of Croft Developments, with all holdings to be absorbed by a new trust established in the name of Robert Vance. Ethan laughed, a strained, incredulous sound. You're insane. All of you. I'm not signing anything. I'll see you in court. My lawyers will tear you apart. Your lawyers? Julian raised an eyebrow. The firm of Hadley, Stern and Finch. Their retainer was paid from a corporate account that is now frozen. They dropped you as a client this morning. You currently have no legal representation. The shield of arrogance finally cracked. Ethan stared at Julian, then at Amelia, and finally at Clara. He was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. The woman in front of him was not his wife, she was a stranger. Why? He asked, his voice dropping from a roar to a bewildered whisper. Clara, why are you doing this? You really don't know, do you? She said, a flicker of pity in her eyes. You laughed, Ethan. In a room full of people, you looked at my tears, at my pain, and you found it funny. You thought my humiliation was entertainment. She stood up, her posture straight and proud. You spent a decade telling me I was worthless, that I was nothing without you, that my only value was as an ornament on your arm. You took my inheritance, my name, my confidence. You tried to take my very soul, and you thought I would just let you. You thought I was too weak to ever fight back. She picked up a pen from the table. This isn't about the money, Ethan. It's about the fact that my father, a man you never even met, a man whose genius you've been living off of, was worth more than you could ever be. And you, in your spectacular ignorance, have been abusing his greatest legacy, his daughter. She looked down at a different document on the table in front of her, the final transfer authorization. You laughed because you thought you had all the power. You were wrong. With a steady hand, she signed her name. The stroke of the pen was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of a prison door swinging open. It was the sound of justice, long delayed, finally arriving. Ethan Croft sank into the chair, his face ashen. The full, crushing weight of reality had finally broken through. He wasn't a king in a temporary jam. He was a fool who had been laughing at the dynamite fuse he himself had lit, and it had just reached the barrel. 6 months later, Ethan Croft sat in the dark. His world had shrunk to a single room in a rundown apartment building that smelled of damp and despair. The Xenia suits were gone, sold for a pittance to a consignment shop where the owner had sneered at him. Now he wore the same stained shirt for days. His walls were a chaotic collage of newspaper clippings, all featuring Clara's face. Clara at a press conference. Clara breaking ground on a new tech incubator. Clara, poised and powerful, announcing the inaugural Vance Foundation Gala. His obsession had curdled into a venomous hatred that consumed his every waking thought. He had tried calling old contacts, but his name was poison. He was a ghost haunting the edges of a world that had once been his. His phone, a cheap prepaid model, rang. It was Peterson, a disgraced former Croft Developments engineer he'd found living in squalor and bribed with the last of his cash. I have it, Peterson's voice was greasy with conspiracy. The core tech specs for the prize-winning project. It's all here. Hydrocyclonic filtration, dual-stage osmosis. All the buzzwords you'll need. Good, Ethan rasped, his eyes fixed on Clara's smiling photo. She thinks she's erased me. But I built that world. I'll burn it to the ground with her inside it, and everyone will watch. The gala was held in the newly christened Robert Vance Hall of Engineering. The air hummed with intellectual excitement. At the center of it all was Clara. She moved through the crowd with a quiet confidence that was more commanding than any of Ethan's old bluster. When she took the podium, the room fell into a respectful silence. My father, Robert Vance, believed that a single idea could change the world, she began, her voice clear and strong. He also learned that an idea without support can wither. Tonight, we honor his legacy by ensuring that genius is given a chance to flourish. She announced the winners, a young team who had developed a revolutionary, low-cost water purification system. As they came to the stage to thunderous applause, a side door burst open with a crash that silenced the room. A figure strode into the light, his face a mask of desperate fury. It was Ethan. He was gaunt, his rented suit hanging on his frame, a pathetic parody of his former self. He snatched a microphone from a stand, his knuckles white. "This is a sham," he roared, his voice amplified throughout the hall, raw and ugly. "A complete and utter fraud." A shocked silence descended. Journalists surged forward, cameras flashing. Amelia Thorne, in the front row, simply watched him, her expression as placid as a frozen lake. "That technology," Ethan bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at the sleek prototype, "is mine. The foundational concept, the entire hydrocyclonic filtration matrix, was stolen from my company before it was illegally dissolved by these corporate vultures." He turned his furious gaze on Clara, his eyes burning with a mad fire. "She is a vindictive thief. She couldn't handle my world, so she conspired to steal it." Clara's face remained serene. She nodded slowly, a gesture of calm acknowledgement that seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst. "Stolen, you say? That's a very serious accusation, Ethan. Please come up here and explain it to us." Her composure was his undoing. He had expected tears, chaos. Instead, she had handed him the stage. Bolstered by his old arrogance, he strode to the podium. "The core of this system, its dual-stage reverse osmosis chamber and the catalytic converter, was a project I personally oversaw," he lied, spitting out the terms Peterson had fed him. "My ex-wife, in her jealousy, clearly passed my proprietary research to these children." He smirked, believing he had seized control. The room was tense, the academics and engineers exchanging skeptical glances. Clara walked not to the podium, but to the prototype. "You oversaw the project personally? Then you must be intimately familiar with its design." Her voice was conversational, yet it carried to every corner of the silent room. She picked up a small, intricately machined component. "Could you explain the function of the differential pressure regulator? Specifically, how it compensates for viscosity changes in the source water without compromising the flow rate integrity of the ionic exchange membrane?" Ethan's face went blank. The words were gibberish to him. "That's a detail my engineers handled. I was in charge of the overall vision." "The vision," Clara repeated softly. "Of course." She picked up another piece, a small finned turbine. "Then perhaps you can explain the vision behind the resonant frequency dampeners on the turbine blades. What specific problem of cavitation erosion did your vision solve here?" A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. The clicking of cameras was a merciless predatory sound. "Cavitation, yes, a critical parameter. My team presented several options." Clara cut him off, her voice still gentle but now edged with surgical steel. "They must not have presented the right one, because this design doesn't solve cavitation with dampeners. It uses the principles of laminar flow to prevent it from forming in the first place. An elegant solution, don't you think?" She looked at him, her eyes holding his. "Tell me, Ethan, what is the primary differential equation governing laminar flow in a non-Newtonian fluid?" The silence was absolute. His face, a mask of bravado just moments before, began to crumble. He looked out at the sea of faces, no longer seeing adoring subjects, but a jury of experts, their expressions ranging from contempt to pity. Clara turned to the audience. "He can't answer, because this isn't from his world of vision. It's from my father's." For months, she had devoured her father's unpublished journals, not as a manager, but as a student. The grief of his loss had ignited in her a fierce need to understand the man he truly was. She had inherited his mind. "The principle that makes this device work," she continued, her voice resonating with an authority born of true knowledge, "is something my father called asymmetrical fluid dynamics. He theorized it in this notebook." A page from her father's journal, filled with his elegant handwriting, flashed onto the screen behind her. Ethan built an empire on my father's work without understanding a single line of it. He saw a product. My father saw a solution. She then turned to the lead engineer, a brilliant young woman who had been standing silently by her teammates. Dr. Thorne, perhaps you can clarify something for us. The young woman stepped forward. My name is Heiress Thorne, she said, her voice clear, and I am the great-granddaughter of Alistair Thorne, the man who first betrayed Robert Vance. My family has a debt to pay. You, Mr. Croft, are simply the final overdue interest payment. The twist landed with the force of a physical blow. Ethan is correct about one thing, Heiress continued, her gaze withering. He did pay for information about this project, from a man named Peterson. But Peterson has been on the Vance Foundation payroll for the last 5 months. The information you bought was bait. Deliberately flawed schematics designed to sound impressive to an amateur, but be laughably incorrect to an expert. We knew your ego wouldn't let Clara succeed without you trying to claim or destroy her work. So we built you a stage. She tapped her tablet. A new image appeared on the screen. Grainy security footage of Ethan in his squalid apartment. And then his own voice filled the hall, captured by a hidden microphone. Just give me the key phrases, Peterson. The things that will make me sound like I know what I'm talking about. I don't care about the science, just make me sound smart. These nerds live for this stuff. I'll crash the gala. By the time they sort it out, her reputation will be in tatters. The trap had sprung. This was a carefully constructed theatre of humiliation. Amelia Thorne finally stood up. Hubris is a gravity all its own, Ethan, she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. It was only ever a matter of time before you collapsed under your own weight. You once found a woman's pain amusing enough to laugh at. Tell me, is your own humiliation as funny? The last of Ethan's composure shattered. He stared wildly around the room, a cornered animal. For a fleeting second his eyes met Clara's, and in them was not rage, but a desperate pleading confusion, as if he still couldn't comprehend how the decorative vase had become the architect of his doom. Then, with a guttural roar, he lunged not for the exit, but for Clara, his hands clawed. Security intercepted him instantly, but the image was seared into every mind. The former Titan, now a wild animal. As they dragged him away, a reporter shouted, "Mr. Croft, what will you do now?" He didn't answer. He just babbled, a string of broken, incoherent words. His last sound to echo in the hall was not a roar of defiance, but a choked, desperate sob, a pathetic, broken inversion of the laugh that had started it all. Later, on a balcony overlooking the campus, Clara stood with Amelia and Heiress. The cool night air felt clean. His life isn't a tragedy, Amelia mused, swirling the wine in her glass. It's a consequence, a bill that came due. He called me a decorative vase, Clara said, a small, wry smile on her lips. He never bothered to see what was inside. She unrolled an aging blueprint across a table. It was another of her father's designs, one far more ambitious. With a silver pen, she made a small correction to a complex equation in the margin. Heiress leaned in, her eyes wide with awe. Is that a schematic for a stable cold fusion reactor? He called it his pocket star, Clara said, her finger tracing the elegant lines. He thought it was just a dream. The power source was the flaw. He could never solve the containment field decay. But he was looking at it as a closed system. She tapped the correction she had just made. He didn't account for quantum resonance. If you treat the field as a permeable membrane, you don't contain the energy, you channel it. His math is sound. The principles are there. She looked from the blueprint to the sprawling city lights below, a vast web of energy consumption. The Vance Foundation isn't just about honoring the past, it's about building my father's future. She looked at the two women beside her, her allies. The ghosts of her past were gone, banished by purpose. Ethan's cruel laughter had once been the soundtrack of her life. Now it was a forgotten echo, replaced by the soft, sharp scratch of her pen on paper, the sound of a new world being written.